Greetings from the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. Welcome to our university's Secretary of the Navy Guest Lecture Series. I'm Captain Bernie Wang, the Military Associate Dean at the School of International Graduate Studies, and I'm honored to be your moderator today. These lectures are a featured part of the NPS student learning experience, exposing student and faculty to prominent speakers recognized as distinguished leaders in their fields of expertise. Our guest today has been one of our most impactful leaders in the Indo-Pacific region, both in and out of uniform. His last position during his distinguished naval career was serving as the commander of the Indo-Pacific Command. And now he is serving as the ambassador to South Korea, one of our critical allies in the region. Today, Ambassador Harris will provide a talk about the alliance with South Korea. At the conclusion of his remarks, he will answer questions from a team of students who will each ask a question of their own. As time allows, the guest will take questions submitted by the live stream audience. It is now my privilege to introduce the president of the Naval Postgraduate School, Vice Admiral Anne Rondeau, who will introduce our guest speaker today. President Rondeau, over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Captain Wang, and welcome to everyone from the Naval Postgraduate School here in Monterey, California. We also welcome all of the other many viewers able to join us today for this terrific learning opportunity about the U.S. and the Republic of South Korea and of that alliance. It's a remarkable time in global history. And what we have today is the privilege of having a leader who's been in the middle of this for a long time. As you know from Captain Wang, the ambassador has been, of course, a four-star admiral. And what he has been able to, what Ambassador Harris has been able to do is take all those years of his time in command tours, and in operational tours, in warfighting tours. And Ambassador Harris has served in so many different kinds of those commands that you'll be able to see on his bio. And if anybody has had a chance to watch his speech marking the 75th anniversary of the attacks on Pearl Harbor that he gave, it is a remarkable speech that is also inspirational. I've known Ambassador Harris for quite a few years, and every time I've ever had the ability to interact with him, he leans forward, he asks questions, and he's always been a person to lead with a thoughtfulness about everything that he is thinking. And so when one of his jobs in the military was when he was in a capacity as the person who traveled with the Secretary of State on behalf of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. When he was with Secretary Clinton, he traveled to 80 countries and had a sense of seeing the world and what it was all about. And then, of course, he was appointed by President Trump to be the ambassador to South Korea. This is a leader. This is a terrific leader. And I'm very indebted to Nancy Ann Budden for her introducing and making sure that this occasion happened today. So thank you, Nancy Ann Budden. I also want to acknowledge one more person, and that in this job of being an ambassador and of being a four-star admiral, if you are fortunate enough to have a partner alongside, it is a true strategic asset. And Ambassador Harris's wife, Bruni, is a former naval officer and is a polyglot, speaking over 7 languages masterfully. So what a team. So Ambassador Harris, sir, over to you with our gratitude and our thanks for what I know will be a great experience with you. Sir, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Anne, for that kind introduction. Bruni is not with us this morning, and it's a good thing because I would never hear the end of that comment that you made. But thank you for that. And good morning, everyone from Seoul. It's always a pleasure to speak with the best and brightest servicemen and women from across the uniformed services, as well as the Foreign Service and the Civil Service that are in the audience. Also, a special shout out to the international students, diplomats, and interagency civilians for choosing to study at this really remarkable institution in Monterey, in one of the most beautiful places on earth. The Naval Postgraduate School is our nation's premier defense and security-oriented graduate university. I commend Admiral Rondeau and all of the faculty and staff for the important work that you're doing at NPS to educate, develop, and inspire our national security leaders. And a shout out also, I'll add Admiral Rondeau's shout out to Nancy Ann Budden, who's tuning in from Kauai, I believe. That's a tough life you've got out there, Nancy Ann. I should own and be so lucky. As you know, I made the transition from DOD to state 2 years, 4 months, and 20 days ago. And I can tell you that there are some things that still boggle my mind, but for the most part, I get it now. At least I think I do. Or maybe not, as you can see from this slide. One thing's for sure, whether you wear camis or the suit of a diplomat, alliances are an integral part of U.S. foreign policy, which is why I'll be speaking to you today, first and foremost, about the Us Rok Alliance before moving on to the ROK's exemplary response to COVID-19, the U.S. vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific area, and the importance of countering the PRC's malign influence, and finish with a few words about the DPRK, and then take some of your questions. So to begin, I thought I'd reflect on the way that I viewed the security environment in the Indo-Pacific when I was the PACOM commander. You know, I thought about WMD proliferation, assertive China, a resurgent Russia, DPRK, of course, unresolved history, natural disasters and hazards, and the increasing importance of space and cyber, as well as accelerating rates of change. And now, let's take a look at what I think about every day here in Korea. Interesting that not much has changed. This past June, we commemorated the 70th anniversary of the start of the Korean War. This important milestone has given us an important occasion to reflect on the rich and compelling history of our alliance, forged in the blood and the crucible of war, its enduring strength, and its visions for the future. Now, while our alliance is the linchpin of stability and security in East Asia, our relationship has grown to encompass many dimensions, including trade, people-to-people ties, and cooperation across a broad range of disciplines. In addition to our shared history and blood-forged alliance, the U.S. and ROK continue to develop a strategic partnership supporting our shared interests, objectives, and values in this region and beyond. Now, there's a satellite photo out there of a nighttime view of the Korean Peninsula. This photo and the stark contrast between the beaming south and the pitch black north represents choices and their outcomes, what 67 years of our strategic alliance has brought to the people of the ROK. And perhaps just as compelling, what the ROK has brought to the American people. As a recent example, the U.S. ROK partnership throughout this global pandemic has demonstrated the firsthand advantages of partnering in science and technology with an innovation nation. Koreans, Americans, and the rest of the world, for that matter, are all directly benefiting from the ROK's successful response to COVID-19. And Korean companies and sister cities and sister provinces have shown great generosity. In the early months of the pandemic, Samsung donated $4.3 million in COVID-19 relief to local partners in neighborhoods where their U.S. employees live and work. Hyundai developed drive-through testing at 22 hospitals across the United States and provided vehicles for medical and emergency responders. Kia took a break from making cars to producing protective face shields at its West Point, Georgia facility for U.S. healthcare providers. These are just a few examples, because there are many more South Korean companies that are proactively contributing to the health and well-being of the American communities in which they live and operate. We maintain close contacts with partners at the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency, the new KCDC, the U.S. Forces Korea, and the relevant U.S. government agencies. Such strong international cooperation, I believe, is what will ultimately defeat this disease globally. Now, as you may have heard, South Korea faced a second wave of COVID-19 outbreaks this past September, centered in the capital and surrounding areas with between 200 and 400 cases a day. Let me say that again. Korea went on virtual lockdown when we had 400 cases a day across a country of 52 million people. Korea has experienced a total of 28,000 cases and just shy of 500 deaths since the pandemic began in January. The Korean government's approach to COVID-19 has been lauded, and rightfully so, as a global model. It's not that complicated in my view. Follow the rules and follow the science. So here's a typical subway station in Seoul. Notice everyone is wearing masks, and even when protesting the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense or THAAD system, the protesters are wearing masks, as are the police. Again, notice the masks. I believe that one of the major accomplishments of 2020 was the ROK government's ability to instill public confidence in their electorate to go out and cast votes in a national election last April. No spikes in infections followed one of the ROK's highest voter turnouts in over 3 decades. In fact, the ROK National Election Commission officials met virtually with American election officials and shared lessons learned on how to safely hold national elections during the coronavirus pandemic. And we learned from that, as we just saw a few weeks ago. As countries across the globe continue to struggle with containing the virus, we remain confident in the South Korean government's robust and comprehensive response efforts to limit the spread of COVID-19. As the ROK has changed and developed over the years, so too has the Us Rok Alliance. Our alliance is dynamic, and we've built a multi-dimensional partnership reinforced by shared values, shared concerns, shared economic interests, and underpinned by the deepest of people-to-people ties. It's lasted generations and will continue to thrive for generations to come as long as we together nurture it, resource it, and remain committed to it. Now, there are over 2 million Americans of Korean descent, including members of Congress, senior officials in our military, U.S. diplomats and federal government officials, entertainers, and wildly successful business leaders. Also, more than 2 million South Korean citizens visit, work, or live in the United States. On the flip side, pre-COVID, over 200,000 U.S. citizens visit, work, or live in Korea every day, including me, and your 28,500 brothers and sisters in uniform here on the peninsula and their families. These days, though, one is as likely to hear about cultural exchanges between the United States and Korea as you would about these other elements. American music and movies have long been popular in the ROK, but now Korea is a cultural force in the USA as well as it is around the world. And it is these strong and growing people-to-people ties that not only constitute the essential fabric of our dynamic bilateral relationship, but also provide the resilience for us to overcome any and all challenges together. And naturally, there are challenges and disagreements within the U.S. ROK Alliance, which is to be expected in any co-equal relationship spanning 7 decades. The U.S. and the ROK continue to work at the highest levels on such issues as the Defense Burden Sharing Special Measures Agreement and the future command structure of Korean and American forces here on the peninsula as envisioned by the transition of Wartime Operational Control, or OPCON. On the SMA, Special Measures Agreement, what I can tell you today is that during the negotiations, we've adjusted and compromised significantly. We're looking for similar compromises from the Korean side to get to a fair and equitable agreement. Now, despite some of our intra-alliance disagreements, which are a natural part of any relationship as close as ours, our shared values and goals as free and democratic countries are self-evident in the international relations sphere. The Indo-Pacific is an area of great importance to America as well as to South Korea. This picture illustrates this. Today, more people live inside this circle than outside the circle. Let me say that again. More people live inside that circle than outside that circle, And by 2050, more people will live inside that circle than live on the entire globe today. The United States is an Indo-Pacific nation, always has been and always will be. Notwithstanding the negative growth rates attributed to the pandemic, this region is one of the greatest engines of global economic growth and will be for the foreseeable future once the virus is beaten. 4 of the world's 6 largest economies are found here: China, Japan, India, and of course the United States. ASEAN is the fastest growing economic zone in the world, and its members are major buyers of U.S. products. Korea, too, is a $1 trillion economy, in fact, the 9th largest economy in the world. Prior to COVID, our bilateral trade numbers were on a 4-year increase, reaching a record $172 billion in two-way trade in goods and services in 2019, which is a very good news story indeed. The U.S. approach to the Indo-Pacific excludes no nation. It's not a treaty, nor is it a rival to or substitute for existing regional institutions, such as ASEAN and APEC. Rather, it's an initiative that supports these institutions. We don't ask countries to choose between one partner or another. Instead, we ask that they uphold the core principles of the regional order at a time when these principles are under renewed threat. That, of course, brings me to the next topic, a word or two about the People's Republic, and that's China. I'm often asked whether the U.S. is asking the ROK to make a choice between us and the PRC. I tell them that the United States made our choice in 1950. So did the PRC. The young ROK made its choice in 1953, and the DPRK made its choice in 1961. So enough said about choices. The United States has partnered well with China on several important fronts, but the U.S. and Beijing fundamentally disagree on how to approach the current international order. The Chinese government doesn't keep its word, from its treaty with the British on Hong Kong to its human rights abuses against the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, and others, to its attempts at commercial espionage. As Assistant Secretary of State Stilwell recently said, quote, "The Leninist Politburo that runs China wants to set the rules for the whole world, which is why it's essential that free nations exercise vigilance," unquote. This is why we've made it very clear through the Indo-Pacific strategy that the United States rejects foreign policy based on leverage and dominance and seeks instead to strengthen relationships based on respect, equal footing, and fair exchange. We believe in partnership economics. We won't weaponize debt. Instead, we strive to build environments that foster good and productive market economies. We encourage every country to work in its self-interest to protect its sovereignty. As Secretary Pompeo recently said, quote, "China's bullying in the South China Sea reflects a broader choice for nations in the region: coercion and control, or freedom and the rule of law," unquote. To protect the maritime domain, we will continue to operate and cooperate with Indo-Pacific partners, as we've always done, to maintain freedom of navigation and other lawful uses of the sea so that all nations can access and benefit from the maritime commons. In this time of COVID, there is a concern that the PRC is seeking to take advantage of the region's focus on fighting the pandemic to coerce its neighbors and press its provocative claims in the South China Sea, as well as to bully Taiwan. Rest assured, we're watching. I believe that President Moon's new Southern policy for expanding engagement with South and Southeast Asia under the pillars of people, prosperity, and peace comports well with our Indo-Pacific strategy, and it's an area where our two nations can work closely as we move forward together. Now, since the end of World War II, the network of U.S. alliances and partnerships has been at the core of a stable and peaceful Indo-Pacific. No country can shape the future of the region in isolation, and no vision for the region is complete without a robust network of sovereign countries cooperating to secure their collective interests. This is why I also want to highlight the importance of trilateral cooperation between the United States, the ROK, and Japan. It's crucial for our three nations to work together to enhance our security cooperation and preserve the international rules-based order. Notwithstanding the current tensions between Seoul and Tokyo, the reality is that no important security or economic issue in the region can be addressed without both the ROK's and Japan's active involvement. Finally, let me shift to the DPRK. As you've all seen in the news, there was some activity at Kaesong earlier this summer, followed by some choice words from Pyongyang, and more recently, the DPRK's killing of an ROK Fisheries Ministry official. Never a dull moment with our neighbors from the north. Leadership shuffles and rumors of Kim Jong-un's health and Kim Yo-jong's ascendance abound. There is certainly no shortage of palace intrigue for sure, but KGU is in charge. Make no mistake about that. Now, while we all hope for diplomacy to be successful, hope alone is not a course of action. The U.S. ROK Alliance activities and its trainings are designed to support peace on the peninsula and in the region, while ensuring that we maintain our readiness to fight tonight if need be. And while the political climate has certainly improved, we cannot let our guard down. There are ample historic examples of what could happen, including what happened on that fateful day 70 years ago if we're not ready. Just read T.R. Fehrenbach if you don't believe me. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before I move on to your questions, let me say that I've been given an amazing chance to work here in Korea. I say this a lot because it's true. There isn't a better place to serve as U.S. ambassador and no better partner and strategic ally for the United States than the Republic of Korea. So thanks very much for your attention to these prepared remarks, and I'm standing by for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for your thought-provoking comments. Now it is time to get to our students' Q&A team. We have 5 students from various curricula and service backgrounds, including an international student eager to contribute with questions. First up is Major Kaoru Elliott. Major Elliott is a United States Space Force officer. He is a Foreign Affairs Fellowship student currently studying for a master's degree in Security Studies with a concentration on East Asia. He is scheduled to graduate in the summer of 2021. Major Elliott, over to you.
Hello, Ambassador Harris. Thank you for the time to engage with us today. Space has become one of the top priorities for many states, serving as an indication of advanced nation status and a rich well of economic and scientific opportunities. As the Republic of Korea continues to pursue advanced space capabilities and integrate into the international space community, how can the United States ensure a successful space partnership with the Republic of Korea?
Yeah, that's a great question. But before I answer it, let me ask you, are you in the Air Force or the Space Force?
Sir, I have officially commissioned into the Space Force.
Great. Are you guys going to change your ranks?
Sir, I believe the leadership stance is that we are waiting for Congress.
Okay, very well. Okay. It's a great question, and I'll answer it by commenting first that we have already extant a successful space partnership with the ROK. So the answer to the question is to continue to build on that, right? So it's mutually advantageous and strategically beneficial for both countries, and we have initiatives already in place, like our biannual mill-to-mill space cooperation working group. We've had that since 2013 or so. We have a bilateral space situation awareness information sharing MOU that's been around for about 5 or 6 years. We have a framework for cooperation in space exploration since about 2016 or so. And we're currently negotiating joint studies in various other space-related issues. The 2020 Space Security Dialogue, which involved the State Department, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and several other ROK interagency partners, is also extant. So I think that we should continue to support Korea's work in this field, in line, of course, with U.S. regulations, and we have a lot of them, I'm sure you know, with satellite manufacturing industries, commercial launch companies, and so on. And I'll just end by saying, just last July, a couple months ago, we had our most recent Korea satellite put in space by SpaceX. So, you know, we have a good relationship with Korea on the space front, and I think that what we need to do is continue to build on that.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you. Next up is Gunnery Sergeant Benjamin Jacobson. Gunny Jacobson is one of our certificate program students in partnership with the United States Marine Corps. He is working on a graduate certificate focusing on Far East, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific. Over to you, Gunny.
Thank you, Captain Wong. Sir, good morning. My question has 3 parts. Please describe the process, both mentally and physically, of transitioning from Department of Defense to Department of State. And if you could, if there was one, what was the aha moment that set you on the path to continue service to the people after your military service? Lastly, what were the highlights and lowlights of the transition?
Yeah, sometimes these questions are the hardest, right? Because I could end up being quoted far and wide. But I'll tell you, the aha moment, I guess, was when the rotary dial telephone in my office rang. Does that tell you anything about State Department's, cutting edge communications? So part of that is driven by our budget, the State Department. I'm part of the State Department now. We have about an $80 billion budget, which is just about a tenth of DOD's budget. So that 80 billion has to go far and wide, just as the $750 billion DOD budget has to as well. So that's one of the things. I'll make an observation that I noticed when I was in uniform, especially when I was traveling with the Secretary of State when I was Assistant Chairman that Admiral Rondeau talked about earlier, and that is that the military, our military, has no monopoly on courage, right? So we see Foreign Service professionals are on the front lines of diplomacy. They're running PRTs in Afghanistan. They're in Iraq. An IED will kill a Foreign Service officer just as quickly as it will kill a uniformed service member. And they're often serving side by side with their brothers and sisters in uniform. And they're also serving alone, maybe afraid, without the backup that we provide our military in many occasions. So that's an observation that I'll make that I think that we all can take to the field. We all work for the same national strategy. There's only one national strategy, a national security strategy of the United States, and we all work toward that. But we also, I'll just make another observation. We view time, as in the clock time, we view time and words, whether it's the written word or the spoken word, differently. In the military, we measure time in nanoseconds, right? You're going to do a time on target. You're going to do a coordinated strike. Everybody hack your watches and go do your thing. And time matters in the military. We often we don't let perfect be the enemy of the good enough in the military. But in State Department, we view time and words differently because, with an $80 billion budget, time and words are the only weapons that the State Department has, that diplomats have to carry out the missions, the complex missions that are given to them. So we use time to our advantage. Maybe being on time for a certain meeting with a certain official, maybe that's not their signal you want to send. Maybe being late is a better tactical move. And words matter. Words matter a lot. We have our history is replete with instances of diplomats saying something that may have been interpreted in a different way that has an outcome that was unexpected. So words matter, and so the deployment of words, whether they're spoken or written, matters, and the tactical use of time matters as well. So I could go on and on about the differences and the similarities, but I think that's going to give you a good sense of where we are.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And next up is one of our international students. We have Lieutenant Colonel Abdul Haladu. He's an Air Force officer from the Niger Air Force. He's currently a student in the Combating Terrorism curriculum at the Naval Postgraduate School. Colonel Haladu will complete his degree in December. Over to you, Colonel Haladu.
Thank you, Ambassador, for this excellent presentation. It is really a great honor and a unique opportunity for us to interact with you. My question is related to the current ongoing health crisis across the world. According to what you have said right now, South Korea has registered less than 30,000 cases of COVID-19 and less than 500 deaths. Many observers also consider the way South Korea is handling the coronavirus pandemic as a good example. So what are the main factors that can explain this success?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we think about it every day here. And when we compare what's happening in this country with our country, the United States. So I'll say it again. I think the key is simply to follow the science and follow the rules. So the government establishes nationwide rules across all the provinces here for the 52 million people that live here, and people follow those rules. They're going to begin to fine people, charge people if they are caught outside without wearing a mask. Is that draconian? I don't know. I mean, is it? Would you? There's a chart. There's a poster that the city of Seoul put up, and it said talked about masks, and it said choose your mask. And so there's a person in the picture that has this mask to choose, or there's a person in the picture laying in a hospital bed on a ventilator. So choose your mask. So they follow the rules and follow the science here. There is strong coordination across all levels of government, from the national to the metropolitan city governments. They had a 3-tier system, and now it's a 5-tier system. 1, 2, 1, 1.5, 2, 3, 4, I guess, something like that. So we just went from tier 1 to tier 1.5, and that affects social distancing. That affects the number of people that can gather. And as you go up that tiering, it means certain stores have to close, bars can't open, public assembly is prohibited, and this is a very demonstrative nation. People will demonstrate out in front of the embassy here on just about any reason. But when the rule sets go down and the tiering increases, people aren't allowed to demonstrate, and they follow those rules. And the results, I think, speak for themselves. They have large-scale testing. They do contact tracing here. They've elevated it to an art form. And I'll be the first to admit, a lot of that contact tracing would not sit well in the United States because it violates individual liberties. They can track you through your cell phone. They know where you've been. They know that if there's a case pops positive in a department store, they know who's been in that department store, and they'll track you down like a bloodhound and say you got to get tested and all that. So that's a little frightening if you're depending on what country you're from, like the United States, for example. But they do that here, and the people here accept that because the 30,000 cases and 500 deaths over 10 months. That's a pretty staggering statistic compared to other countries. And then there's strong coordination with the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency, KDCA, which works very closely with our Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, as well as other international organizations. So all these things together goes into that saying, follow the rules and follow the science. That makes the situation controllable and successful here in Korea.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Next up is Lieutenant Commander James Riley. Lieutenant Commander Riley is a U.S. Coast Guard officer studying human systems integration. He has served in a number of billets in the Pacific and the Caribbean. Lieutenant Commander Riley is an MH-65 pilot. Over to you, Lieutenant Commander Riley.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ambassador, thanks again for the presentation. Your insights have been, it's been really neat to hear all that. I have a question about the Chinese Coast Guard. Recently, they've been in the news as a draft law was released that could extend its use of force policy. What, if anything, should be the U.S. response to this? And more generally, how should the U.S. and its allies in the region counter elevated levels of aggression from state actors, like you mentioned, North Korea and China, while maintaining stability and keeping things from devolving?
Yeah, great question. But before I get to it, let me ask you a quick question. The background you have, is that a picture in your office, or is that some screenshot thing you've figured out how to put that background on the picture?
That's a screenshot I pulled up, sir. I can't take credit. I'm not in there, but I know that's the South Korean Coast Guard, which I did work with when I was in the Pacific.
So you have that somehow captured so that it looks like it's behind you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Well, I need to get some techie to tell me how to do that, because I've got this thing behind me that I'm not too crazy about. Okay. So on your question, I think having a legal basis to scrutinize post-incident actions, I think that's necessary for all enforcement agencies, including the China Coast Guard. There's two ways to look at their draft law. You can be pessimistic about it and think that it's another provocative move, or you can be optimistic about it and realize that the PRC is finally codifying what is really the international norm. U.S. Coast Guard, for example, and the weapons that your national security cutter carries is a case in point. I think the jury is still out, and we'll need to closely examine the final version of the law whenever it comes out, especially to ensure that the use of force policy respects international law and order, and specifically that we'd like to see it emulate our use of force policy, to use only that reasonable force necessary under the circumstances. Of course, the biggest concern is what the proposed law will apply to and how it's going to apply and where it's going to apply, right? Depending on the translation, jurisdictional waters could constitute almost the entirety of the South China Sea in Beijing's view, which of course would run counter to our view of what is territorial waters and what is international waters in the South China Sea. They have offered no coherent legal basis for their 9-dash line. In fact, the ITLOS Tribunal, the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea, decreed in 2016 that the 9-dash line was invalid. And so, we're not a signatory to the UNCLOS, United Nations Commission on the Law of the Sea, though we follow the tenets of the UNCLOS. China is a signatory, and they don't follow it. And so, that's problematic and something we're going to have to watch very closely. And I think I'll stop there. I think that answers the question.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, next up is Lieutenant Commander Sean Crogan. He is a submarine officer currently studying for a master's degree in regional studies focusing on East Asia. Lieutenant Commander Crogan will graduate in spring 2021. Over to you.
Good morning, Mr. Ambassador. Thanks very much for sharing your experience and expertise with us today. Recently, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for East Asian and Pacific Affairs stated that the United States remains open to diplomatic negotiations with the DPRK. And furthermore, that we remain committed to denuclearization of the peninsula as agreed during the 2018 Singapore summit. As we enter a period of government transition, what do you believe are the biggest challenges to resuming bilateral negotiations? And do you foresee the DPRK resorting to renewed forms of aggression to test U.S. resolve in the coming months?
Yeah, great question. But let me ask you one before we start. How come you don't have a picture of Tang Wahoo, Flucky and O'Kane there behind you, like your Coast Guard brother there has.
Now, I got to get with Lieutenant Commander Riley, sir, and figure out the tech thing, so I feel your pain.
All right, yeah. All right, great question. So we remain guided by the vision and the outcome of the Singapore summit between President Trump and KJU back in June of 2018. There were 4 outcomes from that summit, and those 4 outcomes guide us today. Those include, the transformed relations between the U.S. and the DPRK, work toward peace on the peninsula, denuclearization of the peninsula, and the continued return of war remains from the Korean War. And those 4 things, if KGU follows them, will provide the way for a lasting, a brighter future for North Korea. But he has to walk through that door, and he has not done so yet, right? And so, despite all of the short-range missile testing that has occurred since then, despite the Hanoi summit and its outcome, despite all these other things that have happened, President Trump has still extended the open hand instead of the closed fist, and KGU has yet to take it. So, we're at this point now where, the last thing was, the killing of the South Korean fisheries official by North Korea. Now, KGU did apologize for that. That was unexpected, and it was welcomed. So we'll see what the future brings. Just don't know. I want to telegraph what we might do if KGU launches an ICBM or tests a nuclear weapon again. He's done neither since before the Singapore summit. So those are positive things. Might he do it again? Of course he might, but what we might do is best left unsaid, so that we can continue to both give diplomacy a chance to work and to maintain our readiness to respond if need be. I will say that the U.S. forces here and our Korean forces are ready for any eventuality, and that's the job of U.S. forces Korea. Steve Biegun, who's our Deputy Secretary of State and also the Special Representative for DPRK, continues to reach out to his counterparts to encourage continued dialogue and to restart the negotiations, if you will. So we're waiting for North Korea. We'll just have to see what the future brings.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. That was all the prepared questions, and we have a couple of questions coming in from our live stream audience. So I'm going to have Major Elliott read you the first one that came in. Major Elliott, over to you.
Hello, sir. The questions have orbited back to me for Space Force joke there. Specifically regarding the impact of the recently signed Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which includes South Korea and China, but excludes the U.S. How is the U.S. responding to these challenges in order to ensure a strong economic partnership with the Republic of Korea while navigating the challenges of expanding Chinese influence? And that is from Lieutenant Nicholas Villemis.
Yeah, a great question. So I don't know what we're going to do as a nation. I mean, the thing was only signed last weekend, so we've got to take a look at it. Many of our allies have signed onto RCEP, including Korea and Australia and others. It's okay. We've always said that it's okay to have an economic relationship with China. We do, for sure. We ask nations around the world to take a look at China in the bigger sense. And while you have your economic relationship with them, don't trade your sovereignty for that economic relationship. So I think that's important. It's too early to tell, if what we're gonna do about RCEP, the new version of TPP, and all of that. Time will tell. But we maintain a strong range of bilateral trading agreements. We have a free trade agreement with Korea. We're still the #1 economy in the world. We have a strong trading relationship with Japan, with Australia, and with China for that matter. And so I think we're okay. We're in a good place, but time will tell. I can't give you any more specifics than that simply because I don't know.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And then I'm also looping back to Gunny Jacobson for our second question coming in from the live stream audience. Gunny, over to you.
Copy that, sir. Another question from Lieutenant Villamez. He says, I was on the USS Theodore Roosevelt during the Tri-Carrier operations in the Sea of Japan in 2017, where we conducted operations alongside both the Japanese and ROK navies. During this operation, the Japanese and ROK Navy cooperation was constrained. Having acknowledged the tension between these two countries, how do you plan to encourage further military cooperation between these U.S. allies when they're unwilling to even be photographed together?
Yeah, so I've dealt with that for the last 2.5 years here, 2 years, 4 months and 20 days, and the 5 years before that in Hawaii. It's a challenge. I only deal with it in one direction, and that's with Korea. I don't deal with Japan anymore in this job. And we encourage the Koreans to work with the Japanese for the reasons that I mentioned in my prepared remarks. There's no important security or economic issue in the region that can be solved without both Korea's and Japan's active involvement. And that's simply the truth of it. What has happened is both countries have taken historical issues and have elevated those historic issues into the economic space, through putting certain products off limits and suing and that kind of stuff. So they've taken historical issues, elevated them to the economic level. And then last year, Korea threatened to take the economic issue and raise it into the security area by threatening to withdraw from the JSOMIA, the intra-Korea-Japan agreement on information sharing. Once it crosses into the security arena, it directly impacts the United States, because we said that would affect our ability to defend the Republic of Korea, and it affects the security and safety of our servicemen and women that are here on the peninsula. Fortunately, Korea listened, and they did not withdraw from the JSOMIA, though it came pretty close. And so, they brought it back down, and now it's in the economic strata and underpinned by the historic issues beneath that. We can't want it more than they want it. So both Japan and Korea have to work on this together. This is their problem to resolve, and we are actively cheerleading both to work through this, and we're active in consultations with both countries to do that. But at the end of the day, it's up to them as sovereign nations to resolve this problem.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you. I'm going to loop back to Lieutenant Commander Riley. He has another question for you. So over to you, Lieutenant Commander Riley.
Sir, pivoting a bit, just reading your bio, sir, you've had an amazing career that I think would be the envy of any student here at NPS. I was wondering if you had the chance to go back and say something to somebody at our stage right now, midway through our career. Do you have any words of advice or wisdom for that person?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I can pontificate for hours on it, I guess. I would just simply say that you need to enjoy what you're doing. I mean, that's the fundamentally important thing that I took from my career, and to work hard at whatever it is you're doing, whether you're a Space Force officer or whether you're a Coast Guard officer or whether you're a submariner. hard to imagine submariners having fun. But if submariners out there, you've got to enjoy what you're doing. There will come to a time when you're posted to a job that you really just don't like. I've had a couple of those. Most of my Pentagon tours and on the Navy staff fall into that category. Guantanamo was certainly in that category. And you're going to be faced with, or you're going to end up working for people that you just can't stand, right? And if you haven't already. But the good thing about the military and the good thing about the State Department is that either you or the person you're working for that you can't stand, one of you is probably going to rotate out in about 1.5 years or 2 years, right? And so just suck it up and do your job. And as long as the person you're working for is simply obnoxious but not illegally so or ethically so, then that's just part of the life, right? I mean, you could get out and work for Lockheed or Huntington Ingalls or something, and find yourself working for somebody you don't like also. But far and away, the positives outweigh the negatives. But that could also be the attitude that we bring into the jobs we take, right? So I tend to try to be cheerful. I've always said that civility matters between officers, between people. We don't talk about civility too much, but civility matters, and also cheerfulness matters, right? People don't like Mr. or Mrs. Grumpy, so I think that matters. I think having the positive outlook matters, and probably the most important thing, whatever your career field is, whether you fly airplanes or drive ships or submarines or launch missiles or spaceships and all that kind of stuff, competence matters more than anything else, and love of your profession matters a lot. So you've got to get back in the cockpit, back on the bridge, doing your thing in order to be competent at your warfare specialty. I mean, that's why you joined the military. That's why you picked the badge on your uniform, and you've got to be the expert at that before you can become, a geopolitical thinker or some crazy thing like that. So get back on your platform and become the expert in that, and then you could branch out and think about bigger and other things. That's the only advice I can give you.
Thank you, sir.
Admiral, Ambassador Harris, thank you. I have one more question from the audience, and it is going to be our last question. This is from Lieutenant Kristen Van Boxtel, and her question is there any interest in the ROK joining other democratic states to include the US, Japan, India, and Australia in a quadrilateral security dialogue?
Yeah, there's a lot of interest, and there's also trepidation, here in Korea about doing that. What does it mean if they join a grouping of like-minded nations? We could take a step back and think about the Quad itself and what it represents. So I advocated for the Quad as early as 2016 when I spoke at the Raisina Dialogue in India in January of 2016. I was ridiculed then by some elements of the press, including the Washington Post, for advocating the Quad, which had sort of died a dusty death in 2008. But we were trying to bring it back, and it seems to be up and running now. But what is the Quad, right? They're like-minded countries. They have shared interests and shared concerns. One of those concerns clearly is China. There's no one in charge of the Quad, right? It's not like rushing a fraternity at a college, right? I mean, there's nobody. The United States is not in charge of the Quad, neither are the other countries. So I don't know what the mechanics are for "quote unquote" joining the Quad. I know that it's not limited to 4. I mean, I've said before that, the Big Ten has 14 teams, and The Big 12 has 10 teams, so why can't the Quad have 5 teams or 6 teams or whatever? But there are like-minded issues, and one of those issues is China. Korea is reluctant to criticize China publicly or to sign on to those declarations and things like that criticize China's bad behavior with their human rights record and their provocative claims, sea claims, and things like that. So that's an issue. But I'll just leave it at that. There's no one in charge. It's like-minded, and there's nothing that says that the Quad can't have 5 or 6 teams or more than that. So that's kind of a roundabout way, but I'm certainly not in charge of it, and there is interest here in it, and there is trepidation as well.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. That was the final question. Thank you, sir, and thank you, students, for your great questions. Now let me turn this back over to President Rondeau for final thoughts and wrap up. Over to you.
Ambassador, I thought that the questions that were just terrific and your answers were really terrific. I thought that the one about time was really interesting for our leaders here, that the notion of time is really a major factor in how we relate, how we perceive, discern, and whether or not that's the military and the Department of State or it's countries, and it is South Korea and the U.S. Then the notion of time, sir, that you captured so brilliantly, I think is a great one for all of us to be thinking about. And really, and everything that you gave us was just rich stuff. I want to offer you a chance, though, to provide some final thoughts, Ambassador, with my thanks, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Admiral. Let me just say on time, we take time for granted in the military. We expect things to happen on time. We expect to beep at places on time. We just take it for granted. Most people have digital watches that measure time to the 100th of a second. I have an analog watch because I'm in the State Department and I fly an analog airplane. I used to fly an analog airplane. So, time is relative. It's only a lot of reading if you do it, right? So it's relative. But time can be used as a weapon. And I think the State Department uses time as a weapon very effectively. So I'll just leave it at that. With regard to any final thoughts, I never had the chance to go to Monterey. I wished I did in hindsight. The times I've been out there, it's a fantastic institution in a fabulous location. I envy all of you students that are there and you for doing what you're doing out there. I'm grateful for that, by the way. I look forward to being helpful in any way I can. And I encourage all of you to reach out to me if you have questions and whatever I can do for each of you students and for the institution. I'm happy to do that. Over.
All right, so what we do, thank you very much, sir. Out here, sir.